We, I think, hopefully, are recording. Jeff, would you like to introduce today?
Well, I had thought about it. Maybe I shall. I'm sorry. I know you both really would like to do this, but I'll go ahead and um, assert my egotistical way. Um, we're reading this section of this here book. That's the title mine says. And this section is called Knowing Nature. So we're going from the sort of epistemology, sort of phenomenological epistemology of cognition and our relationship with the ultimate ground of things, and into an actual method. So he's actually dealing with method. And to do so, he first defines what inorganic nature is. And in doing so, how appropriate an inorganic method, inorganic scientific method, is appropriate as relates to its to the sense bound reality of that which is inorganic. In the second chapter here, he starts to lay out a methodology for by then defining what organic nature is, and really startling to think about, because it seems clear to me as I was reading this that many of our problems of our day are because of the way in which inorganic science was sort of co-opted into the study of organic life, and without ever thinking that it might need a different method than that, right? That the inorganic approach is inadequate to organic organisms, and clearly we haven't learned that lesson, because I don't, at least in biology and in the hot mess of medical science that sits on top of an inorganic scientific approach to biology, we have um, created a lot of problems through interventionism, medical interventionism of all sorts, um, um, tangential to that, organic. Excuse me. Tangential to that is an inorganic approach to agriculture that has related in has resulted in stripping of nutrition. Okay. Um, uh, and the life of the soil, and I could go on and on. The technological issues that we have before us. So what we've ended up with, because of this invasion of inorganic science into the organic world, is a confusion of technology with science, that which we produce with the scientific endeavor. And what he does here is lays out the way in which Goethe responds to this moment with an organic approach to an organic scientific approach to life forms. And so this is what we'll be discussing today. I wanted to add that bit about modern technology, because I really had not internalized the sort of the methodology of materialism in a scientific sense uh, that has resulted in the symptoms of our problems in our culture.
I just realized that we're doing headphones, probably.
What's up?
And I don't listen. I don't get your sound, Angus.
Are you muted?
That's my.
There you go.
I muted it because there were sounds in the kitchen. Okay. Yeah, there's one of the things that I find as we'll try to develop as we talk more in depth about the chapter is how important the preparatory work has been, so that we'd be doing into these chapters to lead us into this discussion of a fundamentally different approach to the scientific process, inorganic versus organic. I'm trying to think how it's best to lead into it. There was a couple of things that popped for me as I was reading the first chapter, or chapter 15, about inorganics. Is towards the end of the chapter. He is talking about the use of experiment in science, and he phrases it in a very interesting way. And he talks about the experiment being that, so you've got objective phenomena, it's like being derived from a subjective creation, i.e. the experiment. And the reason I find this interesting is we've got this interplay. We saw how it's like in earlier chapters how thinking is actually transcends the subjective or the objective perspective, and that also we can see how science, as we commonly understand it, we're not talking about Goethean science yet, how also this is the same attempt is being made. We are subjectively creating certain conditions to be able to discover objective phenomena. But the whole time, what we are forgetting in this process is it is all rooted in thinking. So it's you still got that grand picture that we really culminated in back in chapter 13, where it's us as thinking, perceiving beings that are unifying this. Or we are the interface between these two polarities. So I found that very interesting. And there was another angle as well, which I was particularly interested in. At some stage, I began thinking about can't remember where he talks about epistemes and doxes, but for some reason, whilst I was reading, if I was thinking, as I did the ancient Greeks with these terms that he's using, and you've got a distinction in ancient Greek between objective knowledge, which are called epistemes, and this is obviously where we get the word epistemology from, and then doxa, which is like the common belief or the subjective belief, and also functions as the word for appearance or that shine. It's like the superficial. So we get this coming together of these currents of it's like subjective creations coming together with an objective understanding, and again us as human beings behind this process. And just one final thought as well, just to get us going. I did find it interesting that we get to quite a detailed breakdown on what Urphänomene are, or and the reason I chose that word is because obviously the name of Matt's channel. But this archetypal phenomena or primal phenomenon. I'm not sure what term he gives in the term I use in each translator, but it's very clear from this writing also that we are still in the inorganic realm when we're talking about this primal phenomena, and that was something that I wasn't really awake to beforehand. Yeah, so if I'll leave it there. Would you like to come in on some first impressions, Alexander?
Yeah, sure. So, I think one thing in this chapter that I found interesting is how he is sort of slowly trying to differentiate between the science that is relevant for the organic world and the science that is relevant for the inorganic world, which in the next chapter on organic nature will come sort of into full bloom. But he's already stating some things here that he's trying to make, to make that difference. And yeah, he actually goes into the archetypal phenomena or phenomena in this chapter. But he will use the word typus in the next chapter. And sorry, I've got a soundtrack going on. Why is that? Okay. I had a soundtrack on my headphones going on. I probably pressed some key here. Sorry about the interruption. So typus on the next chapter. And yeah, it felt like for me, it felt like he was speaking about the same thing, but at the same time going deeper into what he's trying to describe as typus. It feels like it's a different phenomena from the archetypal. So that would be really interesting for us, or for me to look into deeper in this discussion. What is going on there? And otherwise, I don't know. I mean, for me, he goes thoroughly into a little bit how he describes the science of inorganic nature, but at the same time, I felt like, most of it feels familiar, for me, and in stark relationship to what he has been describing earlier as the relationship between concept and percept, and the role of thinking. But also making more explicit this organization of pure experience through thinking, which he tries to give some examples, but for me that becomes very explicit how that activity is present in, let's call it science sport. We could also say the activity of knowledge in this particular example of inorganic nature. So yeah, that's my impressions here from this chapter.
Perhaps we could tease out this type. What in English it calls it type, and
Jeff.
And then he
just before we go into that, because that's really in chapter 16. Just wanted to wrap up chapter 15. I've got a couple of things I'd like to do. That it is. I mean, that's where the meat of this is. A couple more observations as well. We're introduced to this rational empiricism. Empiricism being the familiar path of gaining knowledge, or the path of science, which naturally has developed as the scientific method. And in previous talks, one of the things that I've done is I've used this like picture of thinking as the glue that's holding the parts together. And there's one part in the 20th paragraph where I realized that when he talks about a web of concepts, we've got yet another picture of what this glue is. We've got all of these separate phenomena out of there, but he doesn't use the word glue, which I've sort of like stuck to. Sorry. I attached myself to, but this web of concepts and again, I think it's so nice to find these different ways of expressing the same idea. I know, so intuitively, when you begin to think intuitively, you don't get stuck to a word choice, because it becomes a full-bodied concept, and then it can take on multiple shapes, be it web of concepts, be it glue, be it it's like the stitching that's like holding together the parts. It doesn't really matter. So that was another thing that stuck out. And coming back to this archetypal phenomenon, Urphänomen, one of the things that is really at the heart of the way Steiner is developing his ideas, it's the laws of the must. And one of the examples that he gives in chapter 15 is he talks about the sun warming the stone, and we haven't got any. This is sort of like a direct effect. It doesn't. It's going to happen. There's no interaction there going on of one being meeting another. It's like one thing, light and warmth. Impacting directly on something else that's like receiving that. And this, so another thing that as he fleshes this out is he's really making us aware of this strict causal relationship, one thing causing another thing to happen. So like, and there's no element of adaptation or choice that happens. These are laws. So, for example, let's just like go with the sun and the light. The darkness of the stone will directly impact how much it is warmed up by, and the it's like the different, whether it's a particularly hard stone like granite or something like that, or a different absorption index to, let's say, a chalk stone or something like that, and the extent to which that heat will be transferred through the stone, or whether it'll sort of like remain more at the surface. So these are all it's like strict causal, mappable, you might like to call it, cause-effect events that are happening. And he also does that. The other example he uses in this chapter is when he's talking about when a stone is thrown. So the two most obvious factors are the initial force of the stone with which it is thrown. We're thinking about the parabola that it describes as it slowly as it makes its way towards the earth after it's been thrown. So you've got gravity and the initial throwing force, which will determine the arc or the parabola, and these are essential characteristics or essential concepts to understand what is being seen. And then, but like always, you get like contributing factors, and the particular one he talks about here is it's like air resistance. Now, that's obviously a real effect, but it's quite minor in relationship to the fundamental nature of the parabola that's described there. And again, the importance here is like being clear in our thinking how we are all, even it's like in the inorganic scientific method, it's like hypothetical models are being created, and then what's happened is so that we separate out factors, or we separate like concepts, air resistance there, to try to work out how it is like impacting on the fundamental dynamic that's going on in this relationship. And by reading this through slowly, we are waking ourselves up to this isn't mysterious. This is the scientific method. This is how we're used to thinking about things. But being reminded of the breakdown, that there is a hypothesizing that is going on there, moving from the general, moving from the individual level, individual observations, to a generalization. That is inductive method that he talks about as well, and that will become important when we start to talk about the types, because inorganic science tries to explain living science with, instead of the inductive method, it's the deductive method, which is moving from the general to the individual. And he also develops in here how this is, I think it was in this chapter, or it might have been the beginning of the next one. No, it's the beginning of the next one, so we'll come back to that one with Kant. But recognizing that we've got inductive reasoning specific to general, and deductive general to specific, and so like two tendencies of thought within the scientific realm of thinking. And to wrap that little bit up, he actually summarizes the end of this chapter by saying the importance of this scientific striving, trying to understand the organic, but is crystal clear that this is a preparatory step for us to be able to confront the organic realm, the living realm. So I think that's the important points that I did want to just add to what was talked about in chapter 15 there.
Can I add a few things? I mean, another thing that was interesting in this chapter, and now regarding a little bit the difference between inorganic and organic, so maybe we can have a bridge going on there. Well, one thing is, I mean, for me it was obvious when he stated it, but I don't think it was that obvious for me before. But he's saying that in inorganic nature, there's no complete system in itself, and all forces that act upon a phenomena are external, which I think is, I mean, it describes very clearly the sort of what holds inorganic nature together, so to speak, even if it's stating that it's not held together. But because for me, in a way, I think in when studying science in school or even in high school, things are presented as being complete in themselves. Because they are sort of, you get different subjects, and you get sort of you go very deep into these subjects. But just take a small example, say the law of gravity. You tend to be given the equation of the law of gravity and the masses, and you look at objects and you make the experimentations and you verify themselves in your thinking and you become satisfied with that. And that gives you a feelness of completion. And you go on to a different subject and a different equation or law, and it's given the same subject of completion. Until maybe you get to look into these more details. I'm thinking when we were studying the astronomical course, or I think maybe you spoke also of this. One of you spoke about the irrational numbers last time or 2 times ago. You go into these details and you start looking into the sort of, but there's a lot of noise here that doesn't make sense or doesn't fit into that completeness or completion that you feel looking into science. In your first stages of education, so to say. And so that kind of opens the door into a question, or for me, it opens the door into a question that there must be more then, and how to look for that. And another thing that I also found it very interesting that he ends this chapter with is that he says that, nothing in the sense world of inorganic nature shows itself as being complete in itself, except the whole cosmos.
Yeah.
And that was also such a very fabulous and mind-blowing idea, because, what is he saying with that? Is it that you can you study the cosmos with the same science, the same thinking, the same method that we can apply to organic nature? That was one idea that came to me. Or is it just that's in the cosmos? Is that the only inorganic phenomena where you can sort of find this soul sense of completion, in spite of it being governed by the laws of inorganic nature? So there feels to be a threshold there between inorganic and organic, which I found to be interesting to contemplate a little bit. Yep. Any thoughts about that from you?
Yeah. Jeff, did you want to come in? I definitely would like to add something there. Me? Yeah. Okay. I think it's beautiful what you're saying there, Alexander, because that's what I'm also picking up very strongly in here. And really, so in my own mind, I end up, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit to a chapter that we've started nibbling towards. He talks about, it's like the dream of science, as it's commonly understood, is to understand all the laws of the cosmos, all the laws of dead nature. And then, so he in a way, he sort of like does create that wholeness. But then what's going to happen in chapter 16, he's indirectly going to say, but every living organism is an expression of a cosmos within a cosmos. And this is something crucial. So you've got to you've got this qualitative shift going on, and we can't imagine the infinite nature of the cosmos. But in science, that's, as it's commonly understood, that's the dream of science, to be able to have conceptually that web of concepts that perfectly describes everything that's going on there. And then as soon as we get to the living, that whole idea breaks down. And he even talks right at the beginning of chapter 16 about how back in the 1700s, beginning of the 18th century, science said, don't touch organics. we can't do anything about it. And basically, I mean, Kant comes along and says he gives them a justification for making that statement. I think, what's the term Steiner uses? No, Kant makes being unscientific scientific, or something like that. It's just in this beautiful it's like clarity of thought, where Kant is like meeting up with this, recognizing this inability of the scientific process as is to deal with the organic, with the living, but rather than saying, okay, let's try and find a method, which we're going to be going into in a second, he says that is the limits of human knowledge. So he sets up this wall as he's trying to confirm that bias that was already there in the beginning of the 1700s. Don't touch the organics with science. Because how does he express it? It's something along the lines of how does anybody? If it comes back to me, I'll fit it in. But he's clear that the scientific process as is doesn't allow us to even enter into that realm. So he makes it off limits. And he doesn't say this in this particular text, but it's intimately linked to this idea of the Ding an sich, or reality being in a realm beyond what we can ever know and experience, which is something, because we've investigated phenomenologically the nature of therapy, we now understand why that is a failure to understand actually what the activity of thinking itself is. It isn't a subjective activity. It is an activity that presents itself in our subjective realm, but it is revealing the objective nature of reality. And because Kant didn't understand that, he couldn't see a way forward for the scientific method to investigate the living.
And what ended up happening is that other than Goethe, who never really expressed himself about what it was he was doing in a way that Steiner's doing now, double click on that point, because Steiner is practicing this scientific approach while writing about Goethe's scientific approach, right? And I can go into the head-heart relationship and where the causative is. But what I wanted to say right now is that I'm reminded in this chapter and in the couple of chapters of the statement that he makes about what anthroposophy is about, which is to bring the spiritual in man in relationship to the spiritual in the cosmos. And what he's saying here is bringing the organic in man to the organic in nature, and that to do anything else is to not practice science. Right? This is that statement he made about Kant. That's why I led off with what I led off with as relates to my impressions of the relevance of this, is that we're just going to keep repeating ourselves because we're using an inorganic method and applying it to organic reality. And what he's understood already in his early life, and I was reading his work, the first work, which is a collection of essays. What he's understanding is that what we're talking about is that which creates, that which is forming brain activity, not the brain activity forming thought. And he makes the distinction, and he knows this phenomenologically. He knows this because when he talks about the head and the heart, he's not using a metaphor. he's saying that the phenomenological organic reality of what the human heart is doing is forming, evolving in its etheric nature, is evolving the brain and orchestrating the harmony of all of the organs, and that is a microcosmic process, right? That's the microcosm you're talking about, and it's going on phenomenologically before the physiology that is a, what do you say, a gesture or a symptom of it, or maybe it's the ground that allows us to become embodied in this way. That's what's at stake here. Like, that's the science we need to have, not the technocratic idiocy, really. Like, I'm just so this is so obvious here, yet I never thought about it before, as Alexander said. I can rail on about materialism, and we can refer to Ian McGilchrist's idea of the left brain dominance, and but what are we going to do with that, right? It is the process, it is the fluid process that which is, I don't know. I'm not going to try to recall what Alexander said in our previous conversation, but that which can't be seen, but which is more real than that which we are calling real, something like that.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm going to ask a question in a second, but I found that little bit of what Kant says. This he brings you this contradiction. So Kant says the being or the essence or the real that you just referred to there, Jeff, it is ungraspable, it is unknowable. But the problem is that life is that essence. It is that which is real. There. So how can we communicate the subtleties of what this type or typus is that Steiner is like asking us to wake up to? Have you?
Let's differentiate them first, because he very clearly juxtaposes and makes the claim, essentially a theoretical proposition. The type is that which every other iteration is an iteration of, right? So the originating factor, the originating principle, I think he uses first principle. The first principle is the type, and the type results in the many iterations, right? And then before that, he sets it up by saying, organic nature has homeostasis, essentially, right? That there's there's not an abstract evolutionary process working on the all the iterations of the type, because each one has its own inherent. This is very Aristotle. This is like entelechy, right? This is what each organism has its own marching orders, so to speak. So it has its own purpose isn't the right word, although it is for human beings who are homeostatic at a super high level, right? Such that we're actually involved in our physiology, right? So, and then you can get into the epistemology of the Christ event, like, but this is crucial, right? And the idea that the type is in organic science as natural law is in inorganic science, right? And a natural law does not apply to organic science. And I'm sorry about that, people, but I don't care how fierce of a naturalist you think you are. If you think natural laws apply to organic existence, you're applying an inorganic scientific process, which isn't inorganic at all, and all you're looking for is a product, something that you can make out of something else, and then you can make technologies that look homeostatic, like we have, right? They seem to act homeostatic, they seem to be self-governing, but they're not. right? And then they will terminate, and the more we depend on them, the more they will terminate. Let's just put it that way. The greater field of termination will happen. We talked about this part before, that this is the intellect as death processes, right? And it's necessary, but the organic is recomposes that decomposition that the intellect does.
There was one thing that was a bit puzzling to me regarding the type, because he says here mid through the chapter, the type is the true archetypal organism. According to how it specializes ideally, it is either archetypal plant or archetypal animal. Which for me makes me feel that he's stating that there is an archetype that is more your, so to speak. I mean, it's higher in the hierarchy than each archetype that you could say. There are like different archetypes. He says that, isn't it? He says there's an archetypal plant, the archetypal animals,
Yeah.
and hierarchy of archetypes, yeah. And there's one at the top, and that is the typus or type. That's the feeling I get from the text, but I'm a bit puzzled if that is what he's actually saying. Because then it sort of goes, I mean, is he using another word for Godhead?
He's using another word for spiritual, I think. And
that where it's going?
He's also going, so this is young Steiner. This is fascinating because I've had a lot of conversation with Jeff Falzone over various mediums, and he is experiencing spiritual soul reality of life generating. He's bringing Aristotle and Plato together here, right? So the archetype is the coming into being, and the entelechy, the individual organism's marching order, so to speak, is the homeostatic process that is relevant to its environment, say. And I don't see. I definitely think there's a hierarchy of types, and there's the whole cosmos, right, which is reiterated in all of the organisms. So I see both, but I don't. At least in the translation that I'm reading, there's not a differentiation between the type and an archetype. It's all type. He does seem to be saying that there's a type that is iterated in all of the plant kingdom, and then there's a type that's iterated in all of the animal kingdom. And now I can't wait to get to the next chapters, because we're going to be using Goethean, real Goethean method on the psychospiritual nature of what it is to be a human being. And he's demonstrating it in relationship to this discussion. So I don't know what to make of that, Alexander. I don't see a difference. Only in kind, maybe. And it suggests to me that what is organic in us is has an absolute continuity with that which is organic in the universe as a whole, and all the other iterations, and that we come to know other organic forms through the archetype that is our psychospiritual organization, is a homeostatic 3D.
Yeah. I mean, listening to you, the idea that comes to me is more that a type is related to law, as in inorganic nature, in the same way that archetypal plant is related to the law of gravitation. You see what I mean?
No, flesh that out some more.
So he's sort of saying that there's a principle of there's a principle governing organic nature. And that principle he calls type. In the same way that there's a principle governing inorganic nature, and he called that natural law. Then there's all these different laws, law of gravitation, law of molecular, organization, law of physics, law of acceleration. And in the same way, there are these different archetypes for different kinds of organisms. Like he says, there's an archetypal plant, the archetypal animal. So there is a principle organizing, or there is a principle governing plants. And that principle he calls type, and when it's particular to plants, we call it archetypal plant. Does that make more, or that's what makes sense to me? Yeah.
I totally get that side of it, but I'm curious to know what connection you're making with gravity, right? Like this is because that starts to get
Not a
nice.
connection, just a parallel.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, I guess. So you're just making a parallel. You're not saying something intriguing about gravity.
No, nothing at all. Just saying that.
Okay.
Just as natural law individualizes into different laws, type individualizes into different archetypes, and different archetypes individualize them into the different plant organisms that we actually see in our planet.
I guess one differentiation that I would make, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that there are a lot of natural laws, but they're not necessarily unified. They're particulars. That's the nature of that which is inorganic, is that it's particular without something holding it together, except the whole cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's one type that reiterates as types, including species, which have, I would suggest, an archetype behind them, and including individuals who are speciating as types that have archetypes as part of their heritage. Ours. I mean, are the only creatures that are homeostatic on the level of self-creation, personality, identity creation and when I say creation, I mean Goethe. I mean this in the Goethean sense, that we produce something organically through our own process of knowing.
Yeah, so just to make clear, no, it's not a parallel. I was not making a parallel between some reality existing out there between natural law and archetype. But more a helpful parallel to understand how these words relate to each other. Relate in the terms of type and archetype, and natural law and different laws, particular laws. But between them, I'm still holding on to the ideas that we've spoken of before.
I think it's really useful what you're saying, Alexander. I'd like to pull together what you're saying with Jep's direct question about gravity, because he does actually talk about this. I think it might have been in chapter 14, but I can't remember. In chapter 13, but he talks about how the law of gravity can express itself. It's like the mutual attraction of two bodies. That is one law, a law of the Urphänomen, the type of the Urphänomen, which is the compelling laws. But he is also very clear to say is that specific law can express itself in the particular in an infinite number of ways. So in that sense, it's like the word parallel, I find it's like really satisfying, because it is like showing the similarity of the goal of science to know the whole of the dead world. They wouldn't express it like that, but that's what it is with that type of thinking. And what when we're looking at the typus, that what we're talking about there is it's like a specific realm. So if we're talking about the archetypal plant, then it's like, what is the origin of of all of the whole system of living forces that work within that to create the whole plant world? And similarly, it's like in the animal realm, what are all of those creative forces that are working there in their different permutations to create, at least into like in esoteric science, like the 3 animal realms, or the 3 archetypal animals. It's like the bull, the lion, and the eagle. And then once we begin to think like that, then I think we can even begin to approach the wonderful thought that you were hinting at, is he talking about the Godhead here? I think ultimately you can see how it's like strict. Yes, when we begin to expand our thinking about what this word typus can mean, we could use it to talk about the whole of everything, the whole of creation, or we can have it to talk about specifically about the plant kingdom, or the realm of the dead, or the animal realm. So I thought it was really useful, really nice that you brought that in there, because it also connects with these thoughts that I was having around chapter 13 here, where he really is he's taking us beyond ourselves to really begin to experience what these infinite realms that actually express themselves in experience, that we can know, and in that sense, it's like, and as he said at the end of chapter 15, science is a starting process. So like essentially we're trying to do the same thing in the organic world as we're trying to do in the inorganic world, but we can't use the methodology that we use to understand the typus of the inorganic world, the urphenomenon, the urform, or whatever he calls it, a primal form, I think. But still, we want a scientific approach to it, and this is what Goethe is actually providing. This is like when we go into talking about intuition. So I'm definitely seeing a strong overlap there. I would also like to add to like one more picture. This is a result of actually a conversation with somebody, not Amanda Bospet, but we were talking about light and tolerance type of things, and he's a physicist, and we were talking about the quantum world, because it's an area that interests him. And I said, so like spontaneously, this wasn't something I had pre-thought, but it's a thought that stuck with me. When you talk about the quantum world, you're always talking about the probabilities of something. It's like coming into existence, the probability of something being in a certain place or having a certain velocity. So certainties don't exist in the quantum world. But it's a normal distribution curve that you're looking at there. And one of the thoughts that came to me is, well, in actual fact, I could really, if you got a little bit creative with this idea about the quantum field, where everything comes into existence out of, that if we use it as an image, instead of a natural distribution curve going on there for phenomena, which might be that for the dead world, perhaps in this quantum field, so that there are intelligences that sort of like shape the normal distribution curve for a oak tree into the shape of an oak leaf. Do you know what I mean? There's some sort of information, it's like, that is making sure that the shape and the form of an oak leaf is recognizable as that, and it's not the same as the leaf for a birch, and it's definitely not the same as a needle for a pine. But they're all using the same dead matter, to reveal themselves to us. But the information that's going into sort of like the construction, the architecture of these things, is of a fun. There's an intelligence within it that is not this normal distribution curve, if we put it like that. And that's not supposed to be a. That might be an example of what we're talking about here. This is an intuitive idea. It doesn't. It's not supposed to be convincing in any way, but it's trying to. It's like, how do we begin to make sense of the fact that as long as somebody hasn't grafted another tree onto, let's say, an oak tree, that oak tree is always, always, always going to produce leaves that have a recognizable oak structure. So, yeah, there's some. Thought I'd like to share that with you. So, what about this intuition? Because this is the other. This is. Did you want to come in there, Jeff?
Yeah, can I just speak on a parallel? Seems to me that this inorganic nature. There is no inorganic nature. First of all, like, there is the aftermath of that which is organic. But look at the soil, for example. The earth is an organism, right? And so what that organism is doing, what that organism is doing is radiating electromagnetic fields, for example, right? And you can measure that, right? But is that a spiritual activity, or is that an inorganic activity? In a way, it almost doesn't matter, because the parallels will always be there. They'll always be there because the pattern underlying that which generates the dead world as we know it is a text written out of the generation of that world, right? And then that world has, versions of death, and death isn't what we think it is. And so if we say dead matter, is there such a thing as dead matter? I don't know. We could say that our neurological system is basically dead, and it radiates that the cognitive activity that we know as the intellect, and that would be a parallel to the earth as dead. The mineralic as not alive, but as an after effect. So I just want to inject that because there's no one world that you can see from the outside, right? Everything is one. And this is the thing about this. When you actually are doing science, when you actually do science organically, it's a religious experience, as opposed to inorganic science being a religion, an institutionalized version of that which we're looking for, which is a yoking to the total reality of things. And this is mind-blowing. This is, like you referred to it last time, as a religious experience. And this is a further, a further intimacy with the gift that he's giving us here.
So, what's this intuition that he's talking about, do you think? Try and unpack it a little bit. How do you view it? Why is it so important? How's it so different?
Well, he speaks about it as a method to attain, the knowledge of the type. Yes, somewhere in the text it says the insight gained on the path of intuition is just as scientific as the proven insight. And this is something that I've been sort of thinking about throughout the years. When studying a bit of Goetheanism and also meeting a few Goethean scientists, is how do you get into the consensus between different people doing Goethean science that your intuition is true. As you were saying before, Angus, it's a subjective experience of an objective truth. So it will always be a little bit different in each one of us. And then we share it. And how do we know that it is true? Because we don't have the same tools to share those truths as we do in normal sciences or in the hard sciences. We can't write down equations. We can't use numbers and probabilities. All these methods that the sciences use to prove something that make them shareable, that makes the truth shareable, is not available in the same way with intuition. So that's a question, something that we sort of need to work with. And the other thing is how then to make the method itself. So how do you develop such a method in yourself? How do you strengthen the method in yourself in a way that when you want to share it, or when you're sharing it, the truth comes out strong and clear enough that it can be witnessed with the same clarity in someone else?
I've got a couple of things I'd like to.
That's why, yeah. To begin with, those are my thoughts.
Really, really good and important questions. I'd like to attempt an answer at both of them. About this shareability, if we look at the example of Goethe's theory of color, and begin to understand it through experience, one of the things or several of the things that can happen are, for example, one of the things you learn is that once you've got a firm foundation of the fact of this key idea that color is the product of the interaction of light and darkness. So keep it simple like that. Then when science runs, for example, into the problem of there is no such thing as magenta, or magenta doesn't have a wavelength, and it has to invent this idea that magenta, which we can all experience, this, for some reason in science, it doesn't have a wavelength. And what they'll explain it away is they'll say that it's red and blue light with the absence of green light. That's interesting. Not. It's a complete cop-out. Whereas when we understand the Goethe's theory of color, we are quite happy in understanding how in what way it is an expression of light and darkness interacting in a regular and predictable way. We don't have to break the system to explain what is visible to the eyes. So that's one way of helping people opening up to the idea that there is something beyond Newton's theory of color. Another thing that can happen is when you understand Goethe's theory of color, then you can actually understand exactly why, so like the pinhole in Newton's experiment was so key for producing the phenomena it did. Okay, so you can predict the mistakes that people are going to make if they don't go into a phenomenology of color, but they're trying to create an abstract system of thoughts around it. So I think that's one way of helping to wake people up and people to be able to form a consensus around it. But this consensus, it's not, to a certain extent, consensus is, I might regret saying what I'm about to say. Let's call it one polarity of a thought, which needs to be complemented with another. But consensus is neither here nor there when we're talking about participation. When we begin to live and weave with these thoughts, it doesn't matter if it's the truth, if it's the real, if I am coming, if it's like the living forces that are working in, let's say, the archetypal plant, if they, with my will activity, I enter into them and I become part of them and I am participating in their own forces, well, who cares if other people agree or not? It's my experience. But what we will find is that when people do enter into this experience, they're actually able to talk about things out of the same spirit. And to give an example of what I was talking about there, about half an hour ago, I talked about how Steiner used the word web of concepts. And I had preferred to use the word glue. But really, we're talking about the same thing. The essential, it's like some of the essential qualities of how thinking interacts with the individual phenomena, that is captured in web of concepts or glue. And in that sense, it's true, but it still retains that artistic element to it. We're not fixing you have to describe this relationship as glue, or you have to fix it as a web of concepts. No, we could probably think of a dozen or more poetic, artistic ways of describing the same fundamental truth that's at the root of it. But it's a good question there, and a really good question to tease that out. How is this different?
May I jump in there? I want to have a pithy little safe statement to make. Intuition is to proof as type is to natural law. We have to give up we have to exceed the justification system, as Greg Enriquez would call our highest cognitive faculty, apparently. We have to exceed the need for proof. That is an inorganic way to think about things, because it's a false certainty. You even have to use intuition to accept a proof in the first place. And so what's being proved to me in medical science, for example, is not proof at all. It's just a bunch of people who agree on stuff for whatever motives they have for doing so. That's consensus? No. That's not consensus. That's not agreement between individuals. Intuition is the intimacy with reality, and it has a what do you say? It has a thought organism that stands behind it at the very least, right? So this kind of science doesn't produce proof. It actually contributes to the production of a greater intuition as relates to that which we can produce. So people will say, well, what are you going to do with it, right? Where's the practical nature of this kind of science? Oh, I don't know. Homeopathic medicine, biodynamic agriculture, a soul spiritual understanding of education, other curative arts and movements, an understanding of art as a method to get at reality, to become more intimate with reality. I mean, I could go on, right? And in what you're saying there, Angus, is that it's not, for me, what you're saying is that it's not science unless we can stay with the phenomena. It's just that we underestimate what the phenomena is as self-governing individuals. We totally underestimate it, and we're dying for certainty, literally.
Do you want to come back in there? Thanks. Something?
I think that's good explorations of these questions. And I think what you said, Jeff, that we go on a wrong path if we try to justify the achievements of intuition. I've been seeing this is one thing that's been happening a bit here in Europe with biodynamic agriculture, which, I mean, it both has a positive but also a negative effect. There's been year-long studies in the application of biodynamic preparations on soil and do you say produce, vegetables? And then compared with other methods, organic, conventional agriculture. And these results are presented in the normal scientific way. In order to, the idea is to, well, we want to show conventional science that these methods achieve good results. And that's positive, and maybe biodynamic agriculture can get more exposure doing that. But then the method of Goetheanism of intuition is left out from that study, of course, from that discussion or that dialogue. It's obviously not, it's used other places, but in that discussion it's left out. So I think, there's, and that's, and it's a form of justification. It's trying to prove something through the method of proof, or trying to show something through the method of proof. So I think, it's a difficult path to travel for the sciences or the initiatives that are based on anthroposophy. A balance there that is a bit difficult. But going back to intuition, if we can now. So one thing I sometimes try to find in these texts that Steiner speaks of the same sort of terms and concepts that I'm more familiar with regarding Goetheanism from, let's say, Holridge, Nature Institute, other authors that I've studied more closely. So, but I never find that. It seems that those concepts were developed later. But he does speak of something here that he calls beholding. And German is, you go ahead, Angus.
Anschauen der Urteilskraft.
Yes, thank you. So I was thinking, Angus, do you want to sort of tell us what that is in German? And if it means, or if the word beholding actually captures the meaning.
Schauen means to look, and anschauen means to look upon. So beholding in that sense, I suppose it becomes even more visual, like with the German wording. But what is interesting is it leads us back to, I don't know if you remember the first chapters of the Riddles of Philosophy, where we're introduced to this idea that the Greeks, they still saw the living reality behind. It's like the phenomena. And this is really a hearkening to or I see it as a hearkening to that idea. Hearkening might be the wrong word, because it's like it's something that's like recreated itself. Well, I mean, Goethe, he had a deep admiration for the Greeks, so perhaps he did actually. He could see that with his artistic sense. It's like when he read about the Greeks, and he knew, for example, that the Greeks, that they have a word that means to see and to understand. And I know it's like in everyday English, we often use the word it as a synonym. I see as into I understand. But the Greeks, they were specific. Yes, there's a verb to see, and there is a verb to see. Let's call it the spirit, or that which is invisible. But there's also a unique verb for to see and to understand. This middle position that we're talking about. It's like through our dialogues here, that this erkennen, this cognition. So, but a sensitive soul like Goethe's, I really do believe it's certainly possible that he picks up on those subtleties that are still living in the Greek language, and they become like an essential part of his rejection of the Kantian idea that we cannot know these, and says, oh, yes, we can. The Greeks could. So all I have to do is out of my own artistic spirit, find it again, which is what he did. And your question actually leads me back to something. I really would like to highlight something that Jeff said so wonderfully. This intimacy with reality, because in the original preface to this is the Philosophy of Freedom, there's one line. It's in the 9th paragraph towards the end, and he says, it's like when we have. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. He says, once we have given up the fruits of abstract scientific thinking to the ether world, then it's not just a knowledge of things that we have, but a knowledge of the real in a living, self-contained, organic, or in a living self-controlling or self-managing thinking organism. And I think what these descriptions help us to view from different angles is what Jeff was saying there, with the intimacy with reality. We're not just interested in the ability to name things is important, but it's a certain type of naming knowledge. But we're interested in a knowledge that is intimate with reality. And when living thinking begins to live in us, or we wake up to how thinking actually lives in us, we start to experience this participation that the real forces, I've named them, but these forces that are creating the oak leaf, this wisdom that is creating the pine needles, this wisdom knowledge that's like lives in the archetypal form of the bull. It's not just a dead name. It's something that lives and creates in me. And that's what I see this Anschauung, this beholding to be. It's a beholding of the conceptual, the idea, always having it's like an experience in oneself of, okay, my physical senses are providing this information, but that is just a particular of a general. So when I go for a walk in the woods, that when I see all the trees sort of like shooting up into the air with their verticality, as I live into the sap of those trees, it's like it'll be happening soon here in Sweden. So like as we push into March, the sap will be rising, and I can live into that process and feel and experience it, rather than just labeling it, writing it down on a piece of paper, and it not having any emotional, artistic impact on my life. And as I enter into it with my feelings, that every now and again, so that because I'm living within these processes, something new comes to me, something that should have been so obvious, but it wasn't until that thought was born in me by being in intimate contact with the reality behind the sensual information. There's the sensorial information, and there's a lovely term towards the end of the chapter 16. It says it's reflecting on the fact that Goethe made all of these scientific discoveries, but it only became real science when dead science proved that he was right. And then he goes on to talk about how, like, this intuition, this beholding, it cognizes the whole, and he uses this term. I think this is Goethe's term. It's exact sensorial fantasy, which then later becomes, he's using the word intuition here often as well as a valid scientific principle, which is true. You can look that up. So like the way in which intuition, it's like multiple times in scientific discoveries, has been an essential component for moving science forward. But this exact sensorial activity, to my mind, is identical with what he's talking about with imagination. So the first stage of higher knowledge. But you asked the question there, Alexander. What about yourself? Did you have any particular thoughts in that direction?
Well, there's one thing that I'm just going to quote, because there's one place where he tries to give a description, a little bit of the method that leads to intuition. So he says that organic science does not come about by outwardly just juxtaposing the general and the particular, but rather by developing the one form out of the other. Which feels for me that he's getting into the field of morphology, where you're contemplating how one form develops out of the other form and trying to create a unified what would be the word in English?
Imagination.
Yeah, unified imagination, but of how the phenomena is sort of growing. Yeah. Or changing in time, like a living picture.
Metamorphosis.
A metamorphosis. Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeff. But in the other, or just a little bit later, he says just as in the inorganic we lead a phenomena back to the law, so here we develop a specific form out of the archetypal form. And that again was a bit puzzling to me, for my experience has been the other way. And I think that's, in the beginning, you spoke about inductive and deductive, I think, Angus. Which I'd be happy if you'd get into a bit more. But when I started studying, I mean, I would contemplate a specific, particular plant form, say the budding of the budding and opening of the oak tree, or an oak leaf, all the way into the flower stage. And then I would apply, and then I would do that into another particular form. And out of that, I would bring slowly the archetypal form would, appear in me as an inner imagination. So it was. I was wondering what he means here when he says that we develop a specific form out of the archetypal form. I mean, that would be in a later stage when we already have grasped the archetypal form. Then we can begin to see and deduct the particular form out of the archetype. But just to say that, just to put that question out, but also just to answer your question, that for me, that's sort of the first stage of contemplation, of exact sensorial imagination.
I think you're right. But I don't think that's what he's saying here.
Mm-hmm.
I think what he's saying here is about how creation works, not how we come to know it.
Mm-hmm.
That the type iterates out into individual instantiations that are microcosmic of the type, but unique in their own instantiations because of metamorphosis in relationship to the environment or evolution. But that our epistemological operation is what you said. And that there's a kind of faith that there is a type. But if you started with a type, you have a prejudice, I would say. You're going to try to make it fit into the type. You know what I mean? That's called stereotyping. I don't think that's what he's talking about. In my opinion, that's the way I was reading it.
Okay. Yeah.
So, Jeff, go ahead.
I just want to add one word to the induction deduction, and that is adduction. And that is that going along, say, with Eden McGilchrist, that the brain is not a transmitter or or it doesn't receive signals. It permits. And an induction is a methodological, epistemological process that has to do with invitation, has to do with opening, inviting.
Right. I'm going to try and give a direct answer to Alexander's question, but you're going to have to help me because I'm not. Something slipped out of my memory. So, and this directly connects to the important point in my mind that you were making there, Jeff. The last chapter 14, was about dogmas, the dogma of revelation and the dogma of empiricism. It's like enslavement of the senses, and so because science basically agreed with Kant that we can know the organic, they had to impose the dogma of revelation. So they create these artificial ideas and attribute everything to it. So they've set, so like, this is a truth. And can either of you remember the ones that he talks about in the beginning of the chapter there? Because he's quite specific, but I can't actually find it in my notes at the moment. He talks about two dogmas. He doesn't use the word dogma though. He's referring to how they try to resolve this breakdown. Because, so science as we normally know it, it's like in the inorganic realm, is inductive. We move from the general, from the individual observations. Sorry, got that completely wrong, the other way around. We move from the specific individual observations and then we generalize out. That's the inductive method. The deductive method is working from the general, so like to explain the and he says that it's like what science did is they did the other, just like they used this deductive reasoning, general to specific, but the general statements that they made were they were dogmatic in the sense that they were just presented. There we go, guys. This is the theory of evolution. Bang. But without any explanation of what is actually going on there, and certainly not in relationship to how through thinking we can know this process. So this is what is going on here with inductive and deductive, that we when we then work with the typus, that what's happening is we are using the separate phenomena of our observations, like the plant in the various stages, and by living with those images, with those sensations in our mind, rather than being provided by the senses. When he talks several times about this being requiring far more effort of our spirits to be able to engage in imaginative thinking, because the senses provide that information that we need to be able to go from the particular to the general. But if we want to go from the particular to the general in Goethean science to actually get to the typus, then we have to live with the observations in our thinking. And then it is together with thinking, this is also why the chapter on the intellect and reason becomes so clear, because it's the reason that finds the glue, that finds the living forces, that puts together these observations. So that, let's say I've observed multiple times the seed form and then calyx and then flower, and they are in my mind, they're separate images. But if I subject my spirit to those images in enough forms and with enough intensity, then I begin to experience how one grows out of the other, the forces living within them, metamorphizing the experience. But that lays a completely new level of burden on my own spiritual activity to do that. So it's actually still using the scientific method, or the scientific method that we recognize, but it's making extra demands on us. Does that clarify, or does that just lead to further questions? Do you recognize what I was talking about there, about the two concepts that he just chucks in there? But
I'm not sure, but is it this conceptual arrangement, purposeful arrangement? No,
it's two specific ones.
Because I remember he spoke about dogma when in the other session we had.
Now, he doesn't use the word dogma here. He talks about how it's right at the beginning of the chapter, where he talks about how science recognized its thinking wasn't up to being true to the scientific method, going from the particular to the general, that they actually reversed it. And so they said, okay, here we're going to impose, this idea, and then just use that idea to explain everything that we observe.
It's when he mentions Darwin, I think, and he says Darwin himself didn't do this, but the followers of Darwinism essentially does do this. And then this was the meta-modern problem of naturalism, as far as I can see as well, is that they start with a whole, but the whole is an abstraction. It is creation may be deductive, but that does not work for knowledge, because you smuggle in a starting point that is always there, generated by you anyway. So why not engage in it at the personal level, such that you can perceive it at a universal level?
Yeah. And that's where this term exact sensorial activity really begin to shine. How it is essentially the same scientific method, but it's like using it's using the human being as the tool, or the spirit as the tool, rather than the eyes as the tool. So different. We have to absorb the sensorial information, but then let it live in us. And that's what comes out. Exact sensorial activity, which is then brought to life as it lives within us.
Yeah, at the beginning of Anthroposophical Leading Thoughts, he's essentially recapitulating his epistemology in this meditation, essentially, this written meditation. It's so dense and wonderful. But he talks about when we come to the limits of what we can know perceptually with our sense perceptions, we come to that limit. The very coming to the limit opens the gate to an aspect in our astral body there for the purpose of being dissolute in his thinking. But in our soul, spiritual life, we come to a whole different array of perceptual capability. And that's when a science using those perceptual organs can be engaged with.
Alexander, I know you need to go.
I need to go soon. Yeah.
You need to go. Would you like to have the final comments, and then we'll wrap up?
Or I can just one thing that I wanted to say that I also felt maybe obvious but important, because I think Steiner will use these terms, but they become even more usable later in the Goethean sciences, in the modern Goethean sciences, if I can say it like that. He will define imagination, inspiration, and intuition as 3 different stages of the Goethean method. And for me, it feels that when he's speaking about intuition in this text, he's speaking about the whole method and not differentiating the method into those 3 terms. So intuition, when in later texts, for me it feels that intuition is the completion of the method that begins with exact sensorial imagination, or imagination as a term itself. So I just wanted to add that for clarification, or at least as I see it.
I think that's really good. I think that will, when we're looking at animals and human beings later, I'm guessing here because I haven't read those chapters yet, but I think what you're hinting at there is likely to come up in that content.
Yeah, good. I think it's both, actually, because intuition is inside imagination, and intuition is inside inspiration, and then it's its own ability that incorporates both when it's developed at a high level.
It's a good way to say it as well.
Great, guys. Lovely talking to you. I'm really looking forward to that. I always look forward to it, but looking forward to the next chapters as well.
Absolutely. What a joy.
Yeah, nice Nice to meet up again. Thank you.
Signing off.